Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where we talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Elementary. So this is kind of like a very interesting episode, especially like from the very beginning, because it's like, oh, we're taking this back to the past. It's like, oh, basically this is going to be a case from the past that's going to come back, come their way in the present day, which it kind of was, but it wasn't under the circumstances I thought it was. I was like, oh, maybe someone, like, essentially what happened is there's a dude named Jack. His son Connor was in a situation where he got beaten up, kind of mugged, and it left him in a coma. He woke up, but he was in a situation where, well, I can't remember if the coma was after it, but nevertheless, after the attack and everything, he ended up getting addicted to painkillers and eventually heroin, and then at one point ended up overdosing. Well, Jack wanted to come to Sherlock and Joan to try to find the person who did it, because it's like, essentially there's a limitation to this whole situation, because this is actually what motivates Jack through the episode. Is the fact is that they're up to a crime being reported, a person can be charged 5 years. After that 5-year point, like, they can no longer be charged for that particular crime. So Jack wants to find the guy who's responsible, because it's like, because in his eyes, it's like that person indirectly killed his son. It's like his son would have never become addicted to painkillers and then heroin if it wasn't for that person attacking him. I mean, really, when you break it down, it's like, I guess it was just because Connor was stressing out, because he ended up finding out later on in the episode he ended up getting kicked out of law school just because it was too much for him. He didn't tell his dad about it because, he didn't want to disappoint him, or, it was too embarrassing for him, too prideful to admit what happened. Probably just all that, and just, getting attacked, probably not being able to work and everything. It became too much, and hence the painkillers and eventually heroin. But I think because to me, when the moment he brought up the heroin thing, I thought that's when Sherlock was going to take the case. I was like, oh yeah, just because you're tapping into that part of Sherlock, because it's like, oh, if anyone can be sympathetic to the situation of being addicted to heroin, it's like, well, Sherlock would, but he didn't take the case. Him and Joan didn't. And an interesting thing too, I'm curious about, if you do know the answer to this, to let me know in the comments down below, but is every case that, like, they reference, they were like, oh, sorry, we got this big case that we're working on right now, or we're trying to solve 2 murders at the same time, like, every case that they kept bringing up, is that something that actually covered in the show? Do let me know, because I get a feeling like they're too specific. They went into too many details for it not to be, especially the doll one. I feel like I remember that one in particular, but maybe I'm just misremembering. Maybe I'm thinking I did, implanting memories in my own head, thinking that I remembered watching that. But, this is my biggest problem. Like, that's what happens when it's like been a long time since I've seen earlier seasons. I tend to forget a lot of stuff. So, in retrospect, now that I'm thinking about it, just kind of a quick note, I don't know if I ever mentioned this before. I've never actually rewatched this season of Elementary. I've seen certain episodes like more than once, just because I might catch a glimpse of it when it's like, because Elementary is syndicated on a different channel. I can't remember. I think it's WGN is what it is. That's not the point. It's not important, but just like, I just thought that was kind of interesting. It's just showed that I've never. It's not actually that rare, because it's happened on with other TV shows too that I haven't. Nevertheless, not the point. Getting on with things. So basically, Jack, time is running out for him, because basically when he takes a restaurant full of people hostage because he wants to get Joan and Sherlock working on the case because time is running out. He basically said, like, oh, you've got 16 hours. If you don't, get this fixed in 16 hours, I'm going to start killing everyone here. Especially, in particular, your partner, Joan, who he makes stay behind to kind of keep Sherlock motivated. Which is something, like, he never outright said it in this episode, which I'm kind of surprised, was the fact is that he never actually, he had his own reservations towards him, but he never went like, oh, this is, you like, never try to turn the tide on Joe and be like, oh, you think this is my fault? It's like, no, this is your fault, because you and your partner should have helped. Obviously he referenced it, but it was like he never kept blaming them. For him, more so than anything, he's just kind of like, he wanted results. He didn't want to sit there and have the blame game, per se. He wanted results. Because the show kind of bounced back and forth. You had Belle and Sherlock dealing with the whole investigation, but you had Joan being there to kind of keep him calm, because Joan's like, okay, there's no way you're going to kill anybody. You're not that type of person. I can look at your pocket and see how much ammo you got. That's not enough ammo to kill everyone in here, which is kind of like, I get what Joan was trying to do. She was trying to keep everything calm, try to make him kind of back down when he's doing it, make him realize, like, yeah, like, she basically pointing out the fact that she knows he didn't come here with bad intentions. He just wants to do right by his son. And for him, he's like, oh, you think you've got me all figured out and everything, which is kind of like, that's kind of what was also going through my mind. It's like, that's not really the best thing to say because you're just going to antagonize him to a certain extent. Obviously, it didn't have the effect that she wanted. She wanted to kind of calm him down and make him realize kind of how crazy he was. But in circumstances, kind of like, well, you kind of understand why he's so crazy. Turns out one of the people there, the dude he beat up the first time he walked in, and he ends up having him like duct taped up and everything, is the cop who had Connor's case originally, but he didn't do anything. So that's why he's super pissed at him. I guess that's why he specifically chose this particular restaurant to hit, because I was thinking like, because when he first entered and hit that guy, I was like, oh, he must be, did you track him down yourself? But it's like, nope, you find out about the whole cop, like him being a retired cop and everything, so he's still looking for the guy that attacked Connor. I ended up finding out a lot of his motivation is also because the fact is he's sick and he's dying from skin cancer. And John's like, I can tell you're not getting it treated. And he's like, no, I'm not. Because for him, he's in a state where he's like, I don't care if I die. I mean, in all honesty, he does care. He would rather die because it's a situation of like a parent should always die before their child. Because why? Because in his case, he's like, if I could, I would exchange my life. You think it's like, it's not out of like, parental, doing it because I'm it's the right thing to do as a parent, that type of situation. It's my duty or stuff like that. He's like, no, because it's easier that way. Because, the pain of like losing a child is something that no one, because in his case, he would rather, like, he said he wakes up every morning wishing that it was him that was dead instead, because no parent should outlive their child, that kind of mentality. And it's just like I said, it's kind of a situation where it's like, it never really came up, but it's like you do really kind of see a situation where you're like, you feel for him, and you're also like, obviously it's not the best way to handle this situation, but he does admit, and he, as you can see, he did go through the proper channels, went through the police, he went to the two people he thought would help him, had the best chance of helping, and that being Sherlock and Joan, but that didn't work out. And it's kind of a circumstance like, oh, they should have taken his case. It never came up in the episode, but I was thinking like, oh, maybe they learned something from this and be like, maybe we should pay a little bit more attention, not let because it's like, oh, they're so, when they get in the zone, they're so focused on one particular case, they let other things fly to the side, because you never know. I mean, because at the end of the day, you don't know how things are going to play out. How would they have known that not taking a case like anywhere between the 2014 and now to not helping him out would lead to this particular situation? You can't foretell that same type of thing, and it's just kind of like they're just always busy. They're constantly busy, always working on new stuff, new cases. I mean, there's literally always something bad happening somewhere, just kind of, that's just how the world works. So you're always busy. So it does, kind of really quickly, like I said, learning the whole lesson and everything. And I don't necessarily mean learning a lesson. It does make you wonder, will they approach cases a little bit differently going forward? I mean, he wrote in a lot too. He tried to get their attention in many different ways, not just showing up, but also other things. So it makes you wonder, do other the way I think Sherlock had phrased it, where it seemed like other people do the same thing too, because they want his help with certain things too. But it's, like I said, certain things kind of take precedence over others. So it's kind of sad, but like, truth be told, is no matter how smart Sherlock is, he's only human. There's only so much he can handle on his plate at a single time. So that's why you don't never really see him doing too many cases at once, with the exception of the fact is that him and Joan were working on like two cases at the same time, and it was like February 2016. But nevertheless, But on the other side, with Bale and Sherlock, they ended up finding out about all the stuff about Connor. Ended up finding out that the job he was working at, he was beat up on purpose because they wanted to make sure that the place he was working at was empty. Essentially, it's this whole, like, it's this big gang thing, this gang called Shoreline 99, and basically they were moving large, like, barrels of stuff, and it's like, oh, obviously they must be moving tons and tons of cocaine. Turns out that's not actually the case. Turns out it's actually maple syrup. Yes, maple syrup. Really quickly before I continue, my favorite line about that whole situation, well, like the whole circumstances behind that. Like, first of all, Sherlock walking through, because basically they had beef with another gang, and that gang might have been the reason why. Because this Shoreline has not been seen in like the past 5 years since Connor's attack. So it's like, oh, so are they all dead? So how can we find the person that's behind this? But nevertheless, what you ended up finding out was basically the gang they had beef with. Sherlock went talking to him by tracking him down by literally walking around. Because Bale made a joke being like, we can't walk around town asking, looking for bad guys. And Sherlock literally does that with a sign being like, oh, looking for bad guys. Gets their attention, ends up talking to the leader, and particularly ended up talking to one of his soldiers, Reggie, because Sherlock happens to notice the dude has a tattoo similar to Shoreline. And then like Reggie admits, he's like, yeah, I was part of Shoreline. The gang got disbanded, and then I came here. He's like, no, but trust me, I've been loyal. Halfway was expecting at some point during the episode for him to get killed. Legitimately passed my mind. I was like, finding out that one of your soldiers is was working with the competition or stuff like that. Just, I don't know. Just, especially the way his boss was eyeing him like that. I was halfway expecting him to do something while they were there. I was like, oh, the moment the back is turned, you're going to see his body flying out the window or something like that. I don't know. That's what I was thinking. But then again, it's like, I mean, that might have happened off screen for all we know, because it's like, it's not like they would do that because they know Bell is a cop. So that wouldn't be smart doing something like that in front of him. It'd draw too much attention. But this whole maple syrup situation, like I said, it was kind of basically they were illegally crossing, getting Canadian maple syrup and selling it. I mean, it was in a way, it was like them slightly going legit, because basically they ended up talking to one of the former member of the Shoreline. Basically ended up finding out that basically their boss Terrell had come up with this plan. Well, basically someone else had given him the plan. It's the guy Frank, but I'll get to that in a second. But essentially, it's like they'd basically done a good job selling drugs, in particular cocaine, whatever the case may be. But it wasn't. It didn't last forever, because the other particular gang in this episode, the ones that had beef with them, ended up kind of stepping on the territory, and it got too hectic because the guys were kind of a little crazy, and it's like Shoreline had to live every day kind of dodging bullets. So it's like, yo, let's kind of get out of this like drug game. It's like they can have that all to themselves. What we're going to do is we're going to smuggle this maple syrup, and then the gang will split up, and everyone will slowly be selling off pieces of it bit by bit, like selling at least a barrel a day. Because it's like some heavy black market stuff. I honestly will admit to you, kind of went over my head the whole thing. Is like, because I was like, maple syrup on the black market. I mean, I guess at the same time, it's like obviously it's illegal because you're transporting it without letting anyone know that you're doing. I don't know. There's a whole thing behind it. It's just illegal maple syrup. Yeah, I've officially seen it all. I just thought that was incredible. But getting back to it, the person behind all of this was Frank, and Sherlock ended up figuring it out because Sherlock ended up hearing the story, because they didn't know Frank's name at the time, but it's like, oh, Terrell's friend. Well, the only person that knows his identity was Terrell. It's like, oh, but Terrell died in a car accident like a year ago. So Sherlock ended up taking this story because basically Terrell's friends got this legend behind him to basically beat up a whole bunch of people at a bar. It was a whole thing. And Sherlock basically traced all the story back and ended up finding out, like, basically he ended up finding out that person involved was Frank, and then he ended up matching the wounds from the bar fight with the wounds from Connor's face, and it's like, yep, literally same dude. Things got a little hectic though, because it's like, oh, but we missed the deadline, which really pissed Jack off, and he was just kind of like, it doesn't matter, because to him it's like, oh good, fine, and then you know who hurt my son. It doesn't matter at this point because justice can't be served to him. Because for Jack, it's like, at the end of the day, that's all what this was all about. This was all for, because without that, it means nothing now. Because like, he can never get justice for his son. He can never, because it's like, like I said, he was willing to die, suffer the consequences for what he did, as long as it meant his son got justice. And now it means, he just he goes to jail. I mean, if not worse, because circumstances were like, he was just about ready to kill the cop, the one in the diner with him, that he blamed them for all of this, which John was talking to him, is like, you can't blame. Yes, you could argue maybe he was a bad cop, but beating him up won't make you feel any better. It won't, fill that hole in your heart, This wouldn't be what your son would want. And then basically there's a sniper outside, and Joan gets a text from Gregson, and she tells him to stop, and he was like, oh. Like, he's like, and he basically tells Joan she saved his life. He took the steps forward. I thought it was like him taking the steps forward, being like, basically wanting a sniper to shoot him, but nothing happened. I was like, oh, okay, good. Because I was about to say that was about to get crazy for Joan, because she's standing right in front of him, and I'm sure that would have been a situation where you got some blood splatter, and that would have sucked. but luckily nothing did happen. So he turned himself in and everything, and they did catch Frank even though they missed the deadline. It wasn't just, obviously the Jack's deadline was also the deadline for the charges against him, but thanks to the hacker group, everyone, they ended up kind of in a loophole about it. Essentially, when it comes to Jack, there's a thing known as tolling, that basically once you commit a crime and then go into another country, basically the time for your crime, those charges are kind of put on hold for as long as you're out of the country. The moment you're back in the country, then the time resumes. Well, in Jack's case, about 2.5 years ago, he left the country for like 27 hours because he went to Canada to do watch some hockey game or something. And so basically meaning that this particular time is no longer the time limitations for charging him, so they still have a little bit more time. So loopholed around it, and so I thought that was kind of pretty neat. I was wondering how, because with I was looking at it, I was like, oh man, there's not that much time left in the episode. I was like, oh, don't tell me it's a situation where it's like, it's going to be handled off screen. It's like, they're going to try their best to fix the situation, but it's going to happen off screen. But it's like, no, they handled it and fixed it up. Two other things I'm going to pull away from this episode. I guess I'll just go ahead and talk about that first. It's like the whole price he had to pay for that, though. Luckily, obviously he's going to suffer the ramifications for it, but I'm sure Jack has some peace of mind knowing that the guy who did that to his son is in jail. But, also, because initially John wanted to get him help and gave him the name of someone that can help him, but Jack kind of threw it away because to him, like I said, living doesn't matter because all that mattered at the time was catching the guy. But now that everything's kind of turned out this way, I'm sure, he's accepting medical attention. So, so now he'll get the care that he needs. Hopefully it all works out for him. But the other side of things is that basically Sherlock has to pay the price for getting everyone's help, and that price is to have his head shaved, but not just shaved himself. He has to have Jones shave it. It's just like, I guess because even Jones like, okay, you could easily shave it yourself, so why do I have to help? It's like, well, we're partners in everything, I guess. So I'm very curious. I really hope the next, I don't know, because I don't think there's an episode next week. So, I'm just like, everything's a little weird, you can always kind of tell when there's not going to be a new episode the following week, just because like, oh, usually at the end when it's like, it's like, oh, stay tuned for our next episode or something like that. Nothing like that happens. So it's like, okay, so there's going to be, if not next week, the week, it's going to be, a while for the next episode, maybe. So maybe it's the week after next, whatever the case may be. So I'm curious to see if his hair will still be shaved in the next episode, or is it going to be a situation where like, oh yeah, so much time has passed, that it's like, oh yeah, his hair is growing back, or it's in a process of growing back. So it does look like it's kind of interesting. Another thing I loved in this episode was when they originally came across the Shoreline 99's like new home base, essentially where all the maple syrup was hidden, and Charlotte's like, shh, Detective Bell, do you hear that? He's like, what? He's like, that sounds like evidence being destroyed. And Bill just kind of gives him that look like, he's like, oh yeah. And thanks to a case in Kentucky in 2011, we have probable cause to go in there under these exact circumstances. And Bill is just kind of like, it's like, Sherlock, obviously I think Sherlock did that because Bill's there. So it's kind of like, oh yeah, we have to go about this the legal manner. But at the same time, if it was any other opportunity, Sherlock or Joan would be like breaking in there, like, picking a lock to get in. So overall, very good episode. Like I said, it's just kind of interesting seeing that. Like, I don't think we've ever really, well, I'm about to say we've never really seen the ramifications of like them, I don't know, certain backlash from their cases per se, but that's not true, because there was a whole reason why Bell and Sherlock were at odds a while back was because Bell blamed Sherlock for him getting shot, kind of had to go through physical therapy, he was going to transfer and everything, but obviously him and Sherlock eventually got over there, like, they, worked together again, and everything kind of works out fine. Like, that's an example, but it's like one of the few examples where there's been backlash from a case, and it's like, this was technically a backlash from a case more so than anything, backlash for not taking a case. And like I said, I am curious to see if something like this pops up. Will there be kind of like similar circumstances in the future or not? Or, kind of showing like, it seems like more so than anything, this episode kind of shows like how, I think I mentioned it earlier. I don't know. I have a hard time remembering what I say, even in said recordings. But it's like, it shows that, once you become so focused on everything falls to the wayside. Now that I'm saying it now, I do remember saying something almost exactly like that earlier. If that wasn't already in a previous recording, because this is like my third time I'm trying to record this, it sucks when you can't focus. I have a terrible time focusing. I think these are probably the hardest things to do because I'm doing it off the top of my head and everything. But that doesn't matter to you. Who cares? Who cares about the boring details, right? I need to work on that seriously. Kind of get my mind a little more focused. The whole point of like having notes is to kind of follow them, but I don't. And once again, I need to just shut up. But yeah, once again, very good episode. But that's really all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.